Okay, let's make a start. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this online meetup. I'm Patrick Fitzgerald, Squiz's sector lead for local government. And before I run through our agenda and introduce today's presenter, I'll just let you know that we are recording the session today so that we can post it on the Squiz website. And we'll also email you a link to the video in case you want to revisit anything or share it with a colleague. We will also send you a short feedback form about this session so we can keep on improving, and we'd welcome suggestions for future topics. And thanks to everyone who gave us feedback about the last session with Wollongong City Council. It's helped us in planning this session. So today we have one presentation. And Dan, could you move on to the agenda, please? It's on the topic of building a digital team that can support Liverpool City Council's increased use of digital. I think the issues around what digital skills are needed and how we work together in more digital organisations are relevant in many sectors. But in local government, they're being called out now as posing significant barriers to digital progress. Below you can see on the slide, I've popped links to two recent reports which highlight these issues, and both are well researched and well worth a read. Following Dan's presentation, which will run for about 20 to 30 minutes, we'll have about 15 minutes or so for Q&A and close by 11 AM Sydney time. To ask a question, just write it into the Q&A tab and we'll get to them after the presentation. Now I'll just try and shut the noise, ambient noise out. The joys of being in an office again. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker. So Dan Lavorato is Digital Services and Design Coordinator at Liverpool City Council. Dan's team serves as Council's internal service delivery team for all things digital. Before joining Council, Dan worked in the higher education sector as marketing manager at a university. And since joining Council, he's worked closely with Squiz over the last 2.5 years, producing some fantastic results for Council, including most recently Liverpool City Library's new website. So Dan, over to you.
Hello, thank you, Pat, for that introduction. Yes, my name is Daniel. I work for the Liverpool City Council. Today I'm going to present on building digital teams. And as Pat mentioned, I've worked very closely with Squiz over the last couple of years to produce some really interesting outcomes. And I think what we have here at Liverpool is pretty unique to the local government sector in that we have a dedicated digital team. So before I jump into sort of how that works, I wanted to give sort of a background on our LGA and what that looks like. So we have what we call our personas. So a little while ago, I attended a News Corp and it was a media meetup with News Corp and 9 News and a few other organizations. And Roy Morgan presented some interesting things to us about statistics about media consumption and the way that people interact with websites and media and that sort of thing. And there were some really interesting takeaways from that. And this was a couple of years ago before we built the team. So what they did, Roy Morgan, is they established these 6 personas, these groups of personas that they categorized people into, depending on what their media consumption was, what their likes and dislikes were, what their living situation was, what their finances were like. And based on these, they then further delved into these and then gave these categories. So what you can find is, so on the left, we have something called leading lifestyles. So some high income, highly educated, progressive, and success, career focused people in the leading lifestyles community, enjoy culture, city living to the max. I won't read all of these, but they go from leading lifestyles down to something called fair go, which is, you know, people who are struggling sort of thing. But the interesting thing is you can find within LGAs, your persona can have elements of all of these personas, and these personas can mix and match depending on which suburb in your LGA you are. So then out of this, what we got was something like this, which I'm not sure you can see that graphic too well, but they broke down our LGA into saying something like, well, our leading persona is something called getting ahead. So it's something right in the middle of that persona sort of spectrum. And then the second one is building security. So they're closely linked. So getting ahead are people who are trying to get ahead in life. Building security are the more half-at-home communities. But if you see the next two, we've got experience seekers and self-savvy starters. So we do have a young demographic. And on the right there, I'm not sure if you can see because of the chat, but there's that index is media consumption. So what we found with our community is that the numbers on the right represent anything that's above average. So 174 index, so they were more likely to read a local community newspaper, listen to commercial radio, read unaddressed mail. So the media consumption was a lot more traditional, but there's still the mix between these young families and up-and-comers, as well as those traditional hearth and home communities. I think the community papers has a lot to do with local translated papers as well, and diverse, multiculturally diverse communities. So it was a really interesting undertaking for us. It gave us a really good grasp of who our community really is. I think you can make a lot of assumptions on your LGA. You know, I live pretty close to the Liverpool LGA, but doing this exercise really opened my eyes on a lot of things as to, you know, that there is this young and upcoming community, as well as the way that people interact with stuff like our websites and our digital offerings. So just to wrap that up, these were our top 3 personas. So getting ahead. So getting ahead are culturally diverse young families focused on creating a prosperous life in their new home. More than a third were born overseas, with a particular hailing from Asia, particularly India and other parts of Asia rather than China. That's very Liverpool. If you've walked around Liverpool, that does sound a lot like Liverpool. The second one was building security, almost exactly the same percentage. Like most young Australians, building security love fashion, playing sport, and sharing a home delivered pizza with friends. But when it comes to values, they are distinctly different to their peers. Despite their youth, people belonging to this persona are likely to hold traditional and conservative values and are likely to be religious. 1/4 regularly attend a place of worship. Again, that's very Liverpool. There's a strong faith community within Liverpool, and that's something that we were made very aware of. And then the last one was the one I was talking about, which are these experience seekers. So experience seekers are bursting with youthful optimism and have high hopes for the future, dreaming of a successful and prosperous life ahead. They seek new experiences every day and look to fashion to express their personalities to the world. Members of this persona skew young. A high proportion are aged 14 to 24, and around a third are living at home with their parents. They are culturally diverse, and about 4 in 10 were born overseas, from a significant proportion hailing from India, China, and other parts of Asia. So the takeaway from that is that a lot of them are living at home and are very technically savvy. So wrapping that up, I didn't want to spend too much time on this, but collating all that data and using it, what did that mean for building a team in Liverpool? Well, Liverpool's audience reflects a mix between these younger households that want to forge forward, combined with our more traditional communities who trust local papers and personalities. So when we built our digital teams, and really our approach to all communications is that it needs to reflect a blended approach to our community. So we need to digitize key processes that our aspirationals in our community may seek, whilst not isolating our traditional hearth and home communities. And there's a picture of Maren, who's actually in my team, and she's sort of synonymous with someone who would be in Liverpool with her young family and works in our digital team and has sort of traditional values. That's kind of like a really good summation of what our Liverpool persona kind of looks and feels like. So using that data, how did we get here? So I think that a lot of LGAs have a structure that's quite similar to this. So I'll spend a little time explaining how this works. So I've called this a familiar face for many organizations. So previously we had the IT team. So we have someone called the Digital Services Officer and the Support Officer, who are really responsible for updating website content. And then within communications, we had the designers. So we have an internal design graphic designer. And then we had someone, which was a new role created, which was my first role at Liverpool Council, which was a web editor. This role didn't exist before I came on. So really what would happen was these two roles in IT were responsible for updating the website, creating new pages. What this meant was there was a big disparity between the communications and IT team. And then there was a big disparity between people sending in requests for the website through communications or IT. So I've summed that up in the next slide. So typically what would happen was all content would be sent to IT, which would take time and leave gaps in the user experience. And then really what would happen was there was no links to marketing campaigns or social content. And then subject matter experts were left out of the loop of that process. So it was less of work with us to create something and more of tell us what you want to do on the website. And this often left gaps because a lot of technical work was then outsourced, stuff like videography, sometimes even graphics if our graphic designers were overwhelmed, animation. And this was this led to an increased cost to council and ratepayers because of that. So because of that, what happened then next is that in 2018, LCC upgraded our council website with Squiz. And this was a really big process that showed that there were significant benefits to aligning that digital services team to communications. So even in that process, there were people from comms, our graphic designers sat with those digital services officers and sort of created a pseudo project team for the website. And then around that time, after the completion of that project, it was apparent that that structure would work really well. So the management went to our JCC, our Joint Consultative Committee, and wanted to sell this idea of a combined digital and design team responsible for a bunch of different digital outcomes. And here is a little summation of what the sort of sell on that was, which was to successfully manage the future of council's digital assets requires close coordination of content provided, the design and presentation of the material, and the operation of the website. Having these three teams working together under the direction of a coordinator will help ensure we provide high quality digital and design services to support council's communications and engagement activities and meet the growing demands of residents for improved digital products. So that was sort of the sell to management and to directors as to why this new team would really work out. I think another benefit of it was that we sort of suggested that not only would we be a team that would service council, but council's associated arms. So places like Liverpool City Council's website, libraries, Casula Powerhouse, which is our arts precinct, the regional museum. All of these arms have their own website and have their own marketing teams. So bringing this team together would act as this internal sort of full service agency servicing all of those sort of products. So this is what the new structure was proposed to look like. In the communications team, there would be the creation of a digital services and design coordinator, which is the role that I sit in today. The digital services officer would be brought into comms, so away from IT. The graphics lead would be the lead graphics person, and then a new role was created for a digital and design assistant, so largely secondary graphics, but also an assistant to the digital services officer and web. And then this was my old role, which was the comms officer of digital products, which was effectively a web editing role, which has now developed into more of a videographer, content producer role. So the benefit of this structure that we mentioned was the sharing of skills. That was really what we really wanted to address. So in the next slide, what we suggested the tangible benefit to council was that there would be a sharing of resources and digital skills which represented a reduced risk for council as skills and knowledge weren't reliant on individuals. And then process mapping became easier and more fluid. So I don't know if this is the case at every council, but what I find is that there are extremely technical skills that live with one or two individuals. And, you know, editing the website, editing a CMS, creating web pages, creating video, that's one of those skills that lived with some individuals before. And saying to council, well, if we built this team, those skills could be shared amongst 3 or 4 people. And that's sort of how the team works today. Secondly, there would be a cost benefit. So there would be less changes managed externally, and we could execute bigger projects in-house. So that's reflected, and later on I'll show you that that's something that came to fruition. We've managed to build really big websites within the skills within our team, and just less changes externally, less reasons to go external for stuff like content and video and that sort of thing. And that would mean also a branding benefit. So it would maintain consistency across our collateral, and our digital assets as well. So having those designers in our team meant that, if someone requests a web page, we don't have to then go to comms to request a web banner. We don't need to then go to a videographer to make a quick video for that page. It's all done internally and done with the same, branding and consistency in tone of voice and that sort of thing. There will also be a people development aspect to it. So, which in my opinion leads to a greater chance of talent retention. So if you've given talent the opportunity to grow within their role and learn more digital skills, I think that's only a good thing. And also greater synchronicity with council initiatives and campaigns. So typically what happens is there's an idea for a campaign that lives somewhere in council. Before, they would have to go to, the comms team to execute the communications, the graphic designers to execute the graphic side, IT to then get that up on the website, someone else to put that on social. That all comes to one team now. That comes to my team effectively with comms assistance, obviously, to help build that campaign, but to execute it, that comes to the digital and design team. And the last point is that I think that what we've developed is a better relationship with our external partners. So I think our relationship with Squiz has greatly increased over the last couple of years because of that. So they know to come, Squiz knows to come to me and my team for changes, for updates to the matrix and that sort of thing. And it builds those relationships a bit better. So this is sort of what I was talking about, where the biggest benefit, I think, in this sort of structure exists. We have a really wide range of skills that we share. So myself at the top, largely in charge of stuff like project management, but also do a lot of I can jump in the back of the CMS and do a lot of the nitty-gritty when it comes to updating the website, building pages, project management, front-end development, forms and automation, content management, workplace digitization, web design, digital and community engagement. The digital services officer is that traditional role, which was that web, largely what I would call our technical lead. So we share a lot of those skills, but then that person also shares skills with the comms officer of digital products, which is workplace digitization, content management, also stuff like videography and animation, and it goes around. So it's not untypical, if that's the word. It's typical that sometimes, if one of us is off, our D&D assistant can jump into our website and execute some changes for some that may have been requested, or if our digital products officer is off, our graphics lead can execute some video edits. That's the sort of thing that we're talking about here, in that we share these skills and we grow them together. And it's really led to a really close-knit team that's really benefited council in a lot of ways. And so the other aspect of this is, I guess, digital capability across council. So we've set up a way within Matrix, and then we've extended this to a lot of our other websites as well, where content owners and authors have a lot of access to create their own content. So what we find is that subject matter experts want some sort of control over, whether it's their own part of the website or something like that, that they can jump in and start creating. So we've set up a system where content owners and authors, through things like controlled permissions and stuff like that, can jump into the back of the website, create some content. And then in that way, our team becomes more of advisors in creating digital content. So they typically would say, okay, well, Comsim, you have access to your media pages, create some media content. We can then jump in the back and give advice based on that they've created. So what this sort of does is it empowers subject matter experts to take control, and ownership then lives with the teams that create that content. Now, obviously, the boundaries are set by my team, and stuff like squeeze permission tools help, and governance then becomes quite crucial. But in this way, what happens is the D&D team becomes advisors to content as opposed to just the doers, which is a shift away from how it used to be. What is really important then is scheduled training. But what I can say is that this model has been really well received, and it's a model we've carried across to our intranet that we've rebuilt in SharePoint. It's a little bit easier with an internal site like an intranet, where everyone can then own their own page. Externally, there's a lot more rules that we have to go through, and obviously there's stuff that we have to abide by, but internally, effectively, we give every team their own page and say, hey, go for it within our guidelines. They go off, and then we look and approve and give advice based on that. And what this does do, it encourages shared creativity and resources. And what we find is that teams often borrow ideas from other teams. So, even with our website, they'll see a team that's created something really interesting and worked with us to create, a landing page or a microsite or something like this, and say, hey, oh, that's a really good idea. I've got this campaign coming up. Do you think that I could do that for, this campaign? And that's something we encourage as well, because if obviously we've executed it successfully before, we want to see more of that. So, measuring performance of this, so some tangible indicators of success. So through this model, we've been able to execute really big projects at a reduced cost to council. So we've built in 2019-20 council's new library website. And also last year, 2020, we executed council's new intranet in SharePoint as well. Obviously, we worked with partners like Squiz to do that. But what we did do is what we can do in this model is that we can keep a lot of the costs down by executing some things in-house. So we can wireframe in-house, we can design in-house, we can build pages in-house. Obviously, you still need to work with your partners, but the more that we can keep in-house, that's how we reduce costs. And we've seen the growth of new digital skills as need has arrived. So during COVID, we've created over 160 videos just last year. So training videos, marketing videos, we were able to execute in-house. And that's something that we would not have been able to do without the ability to share resources across. So the other benefit of this model is if graphics is having a slower period due to something like COVID and we're not producing as much external collateral, we can then refocus those people resources towards stuff like video content, design content, digital content, stuff like that. And this culture of digitization, I think, has been adopted across council quite a bit. So what we are finding now is that a lot more and more processes are being requested to be digitized. And this is the future of, I think a lot of councils will see this going forward, is the requests for more processes being digitized, digitization of workplaces and that sort of thing. And we're working through those requests as they're coming through. So yeah, what does the future look like? Well, I think that those requests are only going to get more and more, and they're going to get more and more complex. So whilst this model has been successful as is, I think as more complex requests come through, the need to have a relationship like we do with Squiz continues to be important. And the second thing that we did was we really want to identify what our gaps are for the future of digital. So obviously gaps in automation AI, service design, CX design, and I think high-end animation. Those really at the moment are the gaps within my team that I'd like to see either upskilled or filled in the future. And, you know, we have to be aware of the complexities of working across platforms. So I'm sure, you know, speaking to other councils, it's a very similar story about the volume of different platforms that exist within councils, and stuff like the DXP that I know Squiz will speak about extensively becomes crucial, because the more platforms we can integrate into our CMS, the better experience it is for people within our council. So those are the sort of three key areas that I see within our future for the digital team. So that's about it for me, sort of race through that. I guess I'll open up to the Q&A. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. That was really, really interesting. I've got a whole list of questions that I'd like to ask.
Sure.
But just a reminder that people can, so anyone can ask a question. There's a Q&A tab. On my screen, it's down on the bottom ribbon, but it might be maybe in a right-hand widget for you. So go crazy. But Dan, the one question that occurred to me is, you know, it's really interesting to see how digital capability is really requiring, you know, the formation of new teams and new ways of working together. One of the, I think you might have referred to council websites as beasts in terms of size, and of course that's one of the challenges for councils in managing what can be a sprawling web presence serving a whole lot of different people with different information and service needs. But another sort of issue that works against a coherent web presence is the traditional organisation of councils in in the different divisions. And that's, one sort of way that manifests itself, I think, is it's very difficult to say what a council website is for, and be really clear about the objectives and goals, and to measure the performance and the results of the website. So that obviously raises the issue of issue of analytics, and you haven't mentioned analytics in your presentation at all. Just who's in charge of that, and who reports to the executive on the performance of the website?
Oh, we do. Yep. Analytics probably oversight by me not to mention it. Absolutely. What we found, actually, it's a really good point that you raised about being beasts. We often find that we get internal sort of fights about, what's on the front page and what gets placed where and that sort of thing. And it's not quite clear on who should make that decision. But a way around that we found is building microsites and landing pages out really well. Really moving away from having the front page of the website be the be all and end all. And then that really helps with stuff like analytics. We find that a lot of our traffic comes from social anyway. So having well-built microsites and well-built landing pages and well-built surveys and stuff like that helps with visibility and with analytics. And then we report on that to the teams and to management as well.
Thanks, Dan. So a question. Hi, Dan. Thanks for the presentation. How big is your digital team at Liverpool?
Yep. So I think I have a slide on that. So we live within the communications team. So my team is myself, the coordinator, a graphic designer, digital design assistant, communications officer, digital products, and digital services officer. So we're 5.
Thanks. And you mentioned quite extensive devolved content authoring. How many content authors do you have across council?
Yeah, it's a good question. We have a spreadsheet that we refer back to. It lives somewhere around 20 to 30, depending on teams. It's a challenge because you have to keep on top of who those content authors are and constantly keep training those content authors. There's positives and negatives to that sort of model. So it lives somewhere in the range of 20 to 30, but it can change quite a bit, and it can change when people's roles change as well. So sometimes when people move on within their roles, they'll say to us, well, look, we want this person to take care of our pages, and we then have to retrain those people. So that from that aspect, training becomes a bit of a challenge. But we do find benefits in that we are, rather than talking to individuals, rather than talking to whole teams, we're talking to a nominated individual from that team who will then give us a summation of what that team's looking for. It's a filter for us. So somewhere in the range of 20 to 30. Brilliant.
I was really struck by sort of the, the way that different teams pick up ideas. So within council, pick up ideas from what others are doing. Do you sort of make any sort of conscious attempt to sort of help that cross-pollination? Do you do any sort of internal presentations or anything along those lines?
It's something we could probably do a bit more of, honestly. I'd like to get a bit more proactive about that. Not particularly, but we have really good shared internal communication with our intranet. So often what will happen is someone will see something done externally and then communicate that internally, that's what they would want to, try and achieve. It's probably something we could be a bit more proactive about. So honestly, it's not something that we present on a lot, but we do get a lot of help from communications. So communications are sort of our surrogates in that regard, where they will present to their sort of business partners on, hey, digital design executed this. This might be a really good outcome for you. So in that way, we work really closely with part of the communications team, but the comms officer for that directorate might say to them, hey, I know that community executed this really well, so this might be a really good outcome for you. So that really comes from the communications team.
Right, okay. Okay, a question. How has COVID affected digital at council?
Yeah, hugely. I think the first 3 months of COVID was probably the hardest I've ever worked in my life, honestly. And I think it would be the same for anyone working in this space. We picked up a lot of stuff like Teams, we're a Teams organization, live streaming. Actually, I didn't mention live streaming. We do a lot of live streaming now. That's another skill that we have internally.
Of council meetings?
Not only of council meetings, but we picked up internal live streams, CEO addresses to the organization, live streaming of events. We live streamed a concert, a seniors concert. That was all stuff that was picked up by my team and helped on with other teams as well. So there was a shift in the way that we approached digital. I think obviously we became one of the more important teams across council pretty much overnight. There was an apparent need for upgrades to hardware, upgrades to people's working situations and that sort of thing. Obviously IT was instrumental in getting people working from home and that sort of thing. What we did do is we set up a codex of working from home guides on how to use Teams, how to run Q&A events just like this. That wasn't common knowledge a year ago. Now it seems to be part of our lives. I think, there was this, like I mentioned in my presentation, one of the big things that we did was we sort of refocused our resources. We weren't producing as much physical collateral, but our designers were still busy as ever because they were helping us produce those 160 videos that we made. They were helping us make, a lot more web content. So because we had this really solid foundation of team, we were able to refocus where our attention went. I think that was the biggest thing. I think you're muted. Sorry, Pat, I think you're muted.
Man, that must have been said a squillion times over.
2020, yeah.
Yeah. How have you dealt with any capability gaps that might exist? Have you had to do any extensive training?
Yes, definitely. So training is an ongoing sort of, I wouldn't say struggle, but it is probably the biggest thing that we asked for and are upskilling ourselves in. So CMS training we roll out to our organization because we are experts in it. I think the biggest training comes internally for our team in that we are constantly trying to upskill in order to service the organization. So, we undertake stuff like short courses. So I've encouraged our designers to do stuff like UX UI courses, that sort of thing, with the help of our people in development teams. We actually did a service delivery course that we rolled out because of the intranet. So we are constantly looking at training and ways to do training better. We're finding that getting people together for a course is more and more difficult as time goes on. So training materials, stuff like those videos that we can roll out and put online for people who are looking for guides on how to do things really help. For example, with our content authors, we rolled out a series of videos on, how to add a widget to your webpage, how to add in a Facebook widget, how to make that content look a bit better. They were really short videos, and it was effectively us just, videoing us, screen sharing and showing how to do it, but they're really effective. So I think those really micro videos are a great way to do that as well.
Dan, thank you. And you've really answered the another question from Reed Beaton. But just in case you've got anything you'd like to add to it, he's asking specifically about internal training. We find it's a tough slog, but in the end worth doing. Do you have any processes that you can share with us? So you've already mentioned the videos, for example, but is there anything you'd like to add to what you've said?
This is something that's going to be a focus for us this year, which is getting a scheduled calendar together. I think that would really help us as well. We're using, at the moment, we have the benefit of having content authors and saying, rather than training everyone, we train these content authors. And they have varying levels of capability. And that's sort of where the difficulty lies, is that some content owners are really good and some require a bit more training. I would love to get to a point where we say every month, on this date, we do squiz training. On the second Friday of every month, we do SharePoint training, we do image training. And I think that's where we're going to end up. The videos do help. So having sort of resources online that we can point to and say, hey, if you're stuck, look at this first, then contact us. I completely understand how it's a struggle, but we're backed by a really good, so we built our intranet, so we're backed by a really good resource, and we have a really good communication tool and a way to disseminate that training. We have a really good way of booking things and building that through the intranet. So that's helpful to us. But I think the gold standard would be a scheduled training calendar coupled with resources.
Sorry, the tech is a bit clunky. There seem to be several layers of unmuting going on. I'll sort of allow another just 30 seconds in case anyone has a last question. But I'll start thanking you and wrapping up while giving people time. So Dan, thank you very much indeed for sharing your experience. It's obviously what you're addressing is really topical, and I think everyone, not just councils, are trying to find their way through this. I guess lastly, I just like to say thank you very much everyone for joining in. Please do give us any feedback and any suggestions for future topics. Dan, if anyone has any afterthoughts and would like to pick your brains about creating digital teams, you look like a nice chap who'd be willing to help out. So
absolutely, yeah. Right. I'm sure that we can throw in my email to the survey or to the post thoughts. Yeah.
Yep, grand. Thank you. So we will send a link to the video once we get it up and ready. Jennifer Anderson has typed, "Thank you so much for sharing these insights and the digital teams. Very useful." And she's mentioned the insights into personas as well. So I'd also like to thank my colleagues Cass and Juan for organising these sessions with me. And thanks everyone for coming along. See you next time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Pat. Thank you everyone for coming.